Thanks, Jeff. Well, one thing I can tell you is today is probably going to be a little bit compressed. In retrospect, I think for what we wanted to cover, we should maybe have allowed 2 days. So I'll be doing a little bit of a talk, and I'm going to just introduce each type of participant actually to you and introduce the registry. Then Jeff's going to talk to you about the way the registry actually works, and there are set exercises that you'll then work through. So you'll act as a distributor and create ICPs, you'll act as a trader, accept them, you'll act as an MEP as well. And so we'll work through the whole process, but it is on web browser. Some of you who work with back office systems, your systems may function differently to the registry or require more attributes to be entered than the registry actually does. But what we do is we'll just be working with the web browser screen of the registry. One of the big things, one of the big changes we did when we did the Part 10 re-implementation of the registry was to enable it to be totally manually driven. So that's why we can actually do this training. Now, first of all, a couple of things. Toilets, if you go out past the lifts here, down to the right, about halfway down a corridor to your right, is both the stairwell and the toilets. If we need to evacuate, I assume we use the stairwell. Just try and keep up with the white here, would be my advice. Now, the course, like we say, is only an introduction to the registry. The registry is a very big and critical lump of software. We may do, if we have sufficient funding, we may do some more advanced courses where we burrow more into the detail and the problem solving and the audit trails actually within the registry itself. It's good thoughts to actually have at the stage, but we haven't started actually preparing any of that yet. Like Jeff said, treat the day as informal. Feel free to ask questions as you feel fit. If you don't want to ask them in front of everyone, just come and see me. I'll be up the back there. We are videoing it. You won't be videoed, and so don't worry about asking questions. You're not going to be actually identified. The reason why we're videoing it is we intend to put it up on our website as modules. So in future, people who may want to do refreshers or they may want to do some training will be able to pick up specific modules off our website, and they'll see videoed sections of the talk, and they'll see the PowerPoints, and they'll see the registry screens and such as Jeff actually works through them. So it will be available for refreshers and for training. So whatever you do, don't worry actually about being identified. First of all, the general disclaimer. I always show this at the start actually of a workshop, because one of the things we want to make very clear is that the code takes precedence actually over everything, and it's the actual legal interpretation of the code that actually really matters. You might take a different meaning out of what I intend, or maybe I don't express things quite as well as what I should. If that's the case, feel free to challenge things as we actually go through. So, the first question, what is the registry? Well, it's big. It's critical to the electricity industry, and I think one of the things that maybe a lot of people who are not directly involved with the registry don't actually realise is that it actually impacts on most aspects of the electricity industry. So it's critical to actually having a competitive market, and if you look at any competitive market that actually exists anywhere within the world, they have a central core repository of key information, and that's exactly what the registry is. It's a big database, and people can go there to get information that they need, and it might be for invoicing of consumers, so customer information that is used in the billing process is located actually in the registry. It might be so that a consumer can actually switch retailers, because the registry actually handles the transition of responsibility from one participant to another. It creates audit trails of everything it actually does, and it generates loads and loads of reports and notifications that actually come out to participants as well as to the authority itself. Wholesale settlement in the electricity market is highly dependent on the registry. If you're a generator or retailer working in the electricity market, the information that's in the registry is absolutely critical. Now later on we're going to talk about dependencies of information and things that people do within the registry, because a lot of different types of participants use the registry, does have a flow-on consequence directly into a lot of other processes. An example might be that a distributor, say, makes an error on the population of price category code within the registry. The downstream consequence of that is that the consumer actually gets invoiced incorrectly. Or let's say the metering equipment provider puts incorrect metering information within the registry. The downstream consequence of that is that the reconciliation system, the wholesale market settlement engine itself, becomes incorrect. And all the losses that error generates is actually shared amongst all participants, and the consumer still gets an incorrect invoice, and the network owner might not get paid the right amount they need for conveyance of electricity. So when we go through the code, there are very strict obligations on accuracy of records and also time periods to do things. And sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense when you sit down and read it, but you've got to look at the whole flow of things that go through, because one person does something and then someone else has to do something, then someone else will use that lump of information. So I'd admit the code, rather disjointed if you try to read it as an operational document itself. We have a bit of an explanation of the registry in the front of the registry functional specification, but it doesn't really provide you a lot with the information flow. We may try and produce that documentation going forward. But the registry also helps people in terms of transparency of information. As a result of Part 10, we now have about twice as much information in the registry as we used to have. And the idea is that people can actually see the information there. From a compliance perspective, we can know the information is there and we can know it's accurate. And it should enable the market to actually work more efficiently. Now, we know there's a lot of issues to do with accuracy of information within the registry at the moment. And we are working with that, and the expectation that the authority has is that by 1 April 2015, all information in the registry must be 100% correct. So it's a large database, it has permissions, people can own sections of information for periods of time, and when they own it, their ownership period is stated within the code. And stated with that ownership period is the obligations to maintain certain amounts or certain information within the registry itself. So, a quick sell for the Electricity Authority, who is the regulator of choice, I might add. So the authority makes and administers the electricity code. It's what we call a third tier legislator, that the Electricity Authority can actually make binding code on participants. And it's empowered to do that under the Electricity Act itself. So the code is really part of the Electricity Act. The authority has very wide-ranging powers within the Act to enforce the code as well. The authority monitors compliance with the code. What a lot of you probably don't realise is that we do receive reports from the registry about what people have or haven't done. We receive comments from participants about a lot of issues to do with the registry that we try to follow up with affected participants as well. The authority investigates and enforces compliance with the code and the Act, and parts 2, 3 and 4 of the Act as well, which are related parts to the code. We contract for market service providers. The authority is relatively small. I think we have about 60 full-time staff at the moment. But instead of doing all the work ourselves, we contract people that we call service providers like Jade to go and do certain lumps of work for us. And we monitor and assess market performance. If you have a look at our website, you will see that we have a database system there called EMI that you can actually dial into, and you can pick up market reports and market information as well. So, reporting of code breaches. I just wanted to mention this one. The electricity enforcement regulations actually have two lovely clauses actually within them. Now, I don't think a lot of participants quite realise the impact of these two clauses, so I just thought I'd quickly mention it. I do have a copy here of the enforcement regulations if anyone has a mind-bending desire to actually read them or look through them, or you can actually pick them up off the New Zealand legislation website. But it's to do with reporting of breaches. Now, there are certain breaches that must be reported, that participants don't actually have a choice to report, and that's actually under Clause 8 of the Code. And what it says, if there's a security type of a breach, that participants must report. You get no choice, but you must actually report a security event actually to the authority itself. But it actually goes on to say that if you see another participant breaching the code, you must report that participant as well. So let's say, for example, that you're a trader sitting looking at the registry, and you look up the metering records and you say, gosh, that's funny, this consumer is recorded as having a Category 5 metering installation, which is really, really big, but it's only a domestic consumer. The records are wrong. What should you do about it? Well, you should tell the metering equipment provider to correct their information. The code requires information to be corrected as soon as practicable. And if you look at Clause 11.2, it's a particular clause that says if anyone knows of incorrect information, they must correct it at the earliest possible time. But then, because it is a code breach, you should actually also notify the authority actually of that code breach as well. If you yourself have breached the code, and maybe you've populated incorrect information in the registry and you go, oops, that's incorrect, and you go and correct it, you don't need to self-report it to the authority. But it's a really good idea if you do, because often rule breaches are the only window we have to know if things are going well within the code or if they're actually not going well. So for us, it's an opportunity to actually say, oh, do we have a problem with the code? Is there a problem with the operational flow of information actually within the industry itself that we should actually go in and have a look at? We do very light-handed regulation in New Zealand. We don't go out and beat people. We try to work with people, and we have some of our investigators here at the moment as well attending this course, and they will go out and they'll try and work with people actually to overcome any problems that actually exist. So, the authority, we have a principal objective, which is to promote competition, reliable supply and efficient operation of the electricity market, all for the long-term benefit actually of consumers. So there's a big difference between what the Electricity Authority's statutory objective is and what the Electricity Commission, which was in force actually until 31 October 2010, actually did. And when we look through the registry and the way some of the market functions actually work, you might question why it's actually in that structure, and a lot of them are actually legacy arrangements that actually existed that we're now adopting into the new statutory objective. But if we looked at what the registry does in terms of this, well, it promotes competition. No registry, no competition. It's critical to competition. It doesn't really promote reliable supply. However, you could argue that the fact that people actually are assigned obligations and responsibility for consumers prevents consumers from actually getting disconnected. So there is an argument that it could promote reliable supply. In terms of efficient operation though, without the registry, the market actually wouldn't operate in the form that we actually have it at the moment. So the registry is really about efficiency. Now, I wouldn't say that we have everything absolutely perfect, that everything is 100% efficient. And the feedback we get from consumers is actually, and from participants, is absolutely essential in determining where we actually have points that actually go wrong within the registry. When the market first started back 1 April 1999, or in fact within the first 2 years, it took the worst participant 422 days to switch a consumer. it took the average participant about 200 odd days to switch a consumer. And since that time, the industry's been working to remove roadblocks and fix issues and actually problems. Now we're down to an average of probably about 3.5 business days to switch a consumer. Now that is world's best practice. What we do here in New Zealand and what participants achieve here is really world's best practice. I think the closest contender we'd have is Ireland, which is very close to what we do. Some of the ones that are a lot further out in their timescales are ones like Australia, perhaps some of the states actually in America as well. And so participants here actually achieve a high degree of interoperability with market service provider systems. Just a quick note, we're talking about a market arrangement here, we're talking about the registry. There are lots of market arrangements. Now, one of the characteristics of the New Zealand electricity market is that it is very, very complex. It's very easy to sit in one area within the electricity market and not realise the complexity or the consequences that actually flow through to other areas. This is a slide that we often just show that simply indicates where we actually have electricity markets. Just for clarity, the one that we're actually looking at, or two, is just actually in here. So the registry lives actually within those two market arrangements, but it does have quite an impact actually on some of the other markets that are actually there as well. I'm sure you're all used to seeing something like this. This comes from one of our annual reports. It is the wrong way around. Personally, I draw it the other way around. But basically, we have generators that generate electricity and who want to get paid for generating electricity. They've made massive capital investments to put generation in place. We have a transmission grid, which is basically a big pipeline that runs through the country and distributes electricity through the country. It's owned and operated actually by Transpower. We have networks that actually connect to the grid, and it conveys that electricity from the grid actually to consumer premises. And so we have consumers connected. Some of these consumers may themselves have generation actually within their own sites, and so they may generate electricity and they inject it back into this network. So we have a physical connection of systems, and then we have a data connection of systems. And the data connections of systems we loosely refer to as the settlement process. And it involves quite a complex way of actually transacting electricity so that these guys get paid, and so that these people pay the correct invoice, and so that these guys here actually get paid. So we have a number of grid-connected generators. We have a number of other smaller generators that actually exist within consumers' premises or who just directly connect to the distribution network itself. We have one transmission network. We have 29 local networks in New Zealand, but we tend to complicate things a bit more because we can actually have that network connected to another network, and that network could be connected to the grid, or it could exist on its own and supply consumers. Now, when we talk about distribution networks, we'll go into what networks actually are and different types of networks. But just to bear in mind that there's a lot of complexity within this physical structure that the registry actually makes transparent to you. So the way we've arranged the registry and market systems is that you don't worry too much about what all these physical connections actually are. You're dealing with data connections. And the registry is the central database that actually identifies that for you. Just we note about service providers. We actually have 8 service providers that actually carry out set functions within the electricity market. We have the market administrator function here, which the authority actually has in-house. And the market administrator does certain operational type issues. But then we have a registry manager, which is the one we're actually talking about today. We have a reconciliation manager, which is NZX, performs the role of reconciliation manager, and they transact physical volumes of electricity. They work out how much electricity a generator should be paid for and how much electricity a retailer must actually pay for. Big process set out within the code. We need to do entirely different training sessions actually on this because it is quite a big subject. But the important thing to realise is that the registry manager is linked to the reconciliation manager. Things that go wrong in the registry directly affect market settlements. It directly affects the allocation of costs to participants. We have a pricing manager here which is fulfilled by NZX, and the pricing manager determines spot price. We won't go into that. We have a clearing manager, and that role is also performed by NZX, and the clearing manager transacts all the dollars in the market itself. So the reconciliation manager carries out a process of clearance of physical volumes. The clearing manager carries out a process of clearance of financial amounts. We have a WITS manager, which is also NZX, and WITS is a wholesale information system that you can get access to by contacting the WITS administrator at NZX. If you are a trader, that is, you buy and sell electricity within the electricity market itself, you must have access to WITS. We're not going to go into that. We have an FTR manager here, which is financial transmission rights. Again, we're not going to go into that. It is a type of a transmission right, sort of a type of a hedge to eliminate or help to control people's risk as price varies through the country. And we have a system operator here. The system operator is by far the biggest of the service providers. EMS, by the way, fulfills the role of FTR manager. Transpower fulfills the role actually of system operator, and the system operator controls all of the grid, frequency, voltage, reactive flows. They control everything. But the important thing to realise is we have all these service provider systems here. For most of them, we have a nice, lovely, big, thick functional specification, and I assume you've all read 300 odd pages of the registry functional specification. I do have a copy if you haven't read it. And each of these has a document, and at the front of the document there is an explanation of what the system is there for and what it actually does, and how you interface with it, because you can only use these systems or get information in and out with certain formats, but they're actually interconnected. They all talk to each other through set interfaces. Market flow. Okay, so one of the things that I always show people is I draw a little block diagram of the electricity market itself, and we're looking here at data flow. So we're beginning to burrow down into what the connections with the registry are actually for. Everything starts with a meter. The meter is a cash register to the industry sitting on a consumer site. It's what determines how much electricity someone has generated or how much electricity they've consumed, and it's directly used in the invoicing process. And so we have a participant called the MEP that we blame for anything to do with meters. So if anything goes wrong with meters, it doesn't matter, it's the MEP's fault. And they live in this area here, which is part 10 of the code. But data has to be collected and it has to be managed. Data has to go to traders, and traders have to invoice customers, and data also has to go through a process to the reconciliation manager, way over to the clearing manager, who will issue an invoice back to traders, which may be a credit or it may be a debit. Now, all I'm trying to show here is that we have a block in the centre actually called the registry, which is what we're going to talk about today. The registry sits core to all of these activities. It's the critical part of the industry itself. If you have incorrect information there, you can affect multiple other participants. And I'm going to show you a little spreadsheet shortly actually that will give you some idea of cause and effects. Now, we have all that information going through the market. How do you identify it? We assign participant identifiers. There's a little 4-letter code that if you're a participant you must have, and you must use in all your market transactions, and it follows all of your transactions through. When you look at the registry, there are 4-letter codes there, and it might be Meridian will have MERI, M-E-R-I, Contact will have C-T, C-T. So that code actually follows that transaction, and it helps us identify who is responsible for that particular transaction. So Jeff's going to give you some participant identifiers to use actually within the test system itself. But just bear in mind, all participants have their unique identifiers. We do publish that list of identifiers on our website, and we actually say who the company is that actually owns that identifier. Some companies have multiple identifiers, and the market systems actually handle all of that. When you look at the registry itself, registry participants that I've shown up here are actually users of the registry. So there's a lot of people use the registry itself. But only 3 types of participants can actually put information into the registry. So metering equipment providers have got code obligations to put information into the registry. Jeff will be going through that with you later, and you'll actually do some of those. So do traders, and so do distributors. So they push information into the registry, they receive information back from the registry to use in their market related processes. But then there are other users of information as well. The authority receives information from the registry, and so does the reconciliation manager, because there's information directly used in the reconciliation process. The clearing manager and system operator could, if they wish to. They are actually within the code as having access to the registry. We do have other government agencies that access the registry for various purposes. So it might be for other enforcement purposes, but they can actually look at the registry and determine who the retailer is for certain points of connection. The registry itself, Jeff's going to step through everything the registry actually does with you, and he's going to step through some of the structure of the database itself, so we won't go through that. So it's managed by Jade Corporation. The authority has a service provider agreement, or we call it an SPA with Jade. Part of the SPA is that massive great missive of a functional specification that you all would have memorised by now. It's 24/7, it's online all the time, so anytime you want to use it, it should be there. We do set different reliability standards for business day and out of normal business hours, and we do control the number of times the registry may actually go down for updates. If there are updates carried out, we do publish them on our website. I don't think a lot of people may actually realise that, but we do publish on our website what updates or upgrades have actually been carried out. We do have a registry access policy that sits on our website, and that's the link actually to it there. The registry access policy sets out how we actually grant approvals for access to the registry, who can get access to the registry, and moreover it sets the terms and conditions for access. So if you're really naughty with the registry, not only will we come and talk to you quite meaningfully, we may actually constrain your access. Now, we can't remove your access, but if you're doing something silly like requesting large reports every 30 seconds or something like that for a few days, we will come and talk to you, and we could prevent you from actually doing that. Now, things like that have happened in the past. Usually it's software errors that have actually caused it, where people request multiple reports. Jeff's going to talk to you actually about access, but there are a number of ways you can access the registry. One is the web browser screen, which is manually driving it like we're going to do today. Another way is to use files. So the registry can be automated with file transactions, and they're just dumb CSV files. Now, one of the reasons for just using CSV files is they're secure, because you can't actually insert something into the CSV file that will be activated somewhere else. So we regard them as clean. All the market service provider systems use CSV files. There is web services available, so you can actually send a query to the registry and just get back a little packet of information. Some participants have built that actually into their back office systems so that their call centres can actually have a customised screen. So a customer could ring them up and say, this is who I am, this is my ICP number, or this is my address. And the call centre operator can type it into their customised screen. The registry will immediately supply the information into the back office system, and it can be massaged actually into something that may tell the call centre operator what tariffs that customer is actually eligible for, because it will look at the price category code, it'll look at the metering configuration, the network, and all of those different parts. That's sitting there, it's been there for 2 years. I think there's one participant that actually uses it a lot. But if anyone wants to know anything about it, have a word with Jeff. I can spell it, but that's about as far as it goes. We then have a data hub, which is a way to transact information, and it's secure. And Jeff will talk to you about that later as well. So it stores, the registry stores lots of attributes. It provides controlled access to information, so it sets certain time periods that you can actually update information, and you must be the owner under the code for that information for the registry to actually grant you permission. It's all automated. If you carry out a customer switch at the time the switch completes as a new retailer, you automatically gain access to the ICP for maintenance. The same if you're a metering equipment provider as well. It facilitates switching, and I mentioned switching before, but there are actually 3 types of switching that are carried out. Points of connection can be switched between distribution networks. So you might have a consumer, it might be Kate, sitting here on Wellington Electricity. Her point of connection could be switched to another network. It might be because there's been an error in the way it was initially set up, or it might be that Kate's decided to be part of an embedded network. And when we talk about distribution networks, we'll talk about that more. There's trader switching, where a point of connection actually changes between retailers. So Mario here might exercise choice to go from Genesis to Meridian, and the registry actually reassigns those obligations. And the retailer might decide that they don't like Ron Beatty Electrical actually owning the meters actually on an ICP, and they want AMS to own the meters. And that is another type of switching. Now, all 3 are facilitated through the registry. All 3 operate independently of each other. It's a database of reference. When you look through the main body of Part 11 of the code, it actually says that if you do something based on information within the registry, even though that information is wrong, you're not actually in breach of the code. But the person who put it in there actually is. So what this is intended to do is to enforce accuracy on the registry and enforce people to use a common central repository or central set of information. There are time frames, like I was saying before, for update of information, and everything is keyed by something that we actually call the ICP identifier. Now, when you read through the code, it talks about something called ICPs, which are actually points of connection, and it talks about something called ICP identifiers. First of all though, just some little registry stats. Average response time for the registry is a massive 0.17 seconds. If you put in a web browser query, there might be latency in the communications between you and the registry that expand that out, but the registry as it stands goes very, very fast. There's about 112 million ICP queries put into the registry actually each month. The registry is very, very heavily used. There's about 2,000 new points of connection added to the registry a month, and about 1,000 removed a month. Currently at the moment there's about 2.07 million ICPs within the registry that are active and inactive. There are about 120,000 ICPs updated each month on average, and about 5,500 ICPs are de-energised per month. Now, we know that there's a lot more ICPs de-energised than that, and the participants don't always update the de-energised status within the registry. That's something that we are actually having to think about because it doesn't appear to be causing too much of a market problem. But the real key thing is that in terms of users who are simultaneously using the registry, there's about 1,500 users online at peak times with the registry itself. We don't know how many people actually have access to the registry. I would guess something like about 2,000 people. But there's 1,500 that are using the registry simultaneously actually at peak times. So, points of connection. The term point of connection is actually one that's actually indicates that there's a change in ownership of electricity wiring. So if you've got a local network connecting to a consumer's installation, you've got two owners of wiring. If you go back to the Electricity Act, it talks about points of supply as being that demarcation. We talk in the industry about installation control points, or ICPs. And to that ICP, we actually assign a 15-digit code that Jeff's going to go through to you, and that's called the ICP identifier. That ICP identifier is unique to a point of connection. There are no duplicates actually for it, and that ICP identifier is the primary key within the registry. So if you look up an ICP identifier, all the information that's there is for a point of connection, and only for that one point of connection. But we also have points of connections to which consumers aren't assigned, and these are things like maybe the point of connection between the grid and a local network, and we call them network supply points, or NSPs. Now, we don't populate that information actually within the registry. We handle that all via a separate process. What we handle in the registry is just consumer connections that have ICP identifiers. So, we just talked about all of that. One way that you can actually look at it is this little diagram here that I gave you. So we say, if you're talking about a point of connection, you may be talking about a network supply point, or you may be talking about an ICP. So point of connection is just a name that means both of those. If we look at a network supply point, we can break it down further, and we can say it could be a grid exit point, which means that electricity is predominantly flowing out of the grid. It could be a grid injection point, which means that electricity is predominantly flowing actually into the grid itself. Or it could be an interconnection point, which is a connection between two local or embedded networks. And we assign what we call reconciliation types. And you may see that these things here have a 7-character identifier. Let's pick on Central Park, and Central Park is a GXP. It has an identifier CPK0331. So we come down into here, and it could either be a grid direct customer or it could be a grid to network connection. And when we go through and we look at ICPs, you'll actually see these within the registry. Grid to network means you've got a local network that's actually connected to the grid. Grid direct means you've got a large consumer like TY, which is directly connected to the grid. If this had been TWI 2201, it would have had a reconciliation type associated with it of GD. If this had been Manapori, for instance, then 2201, we would have Manapori 2201 GG, because it's a grid injection point. It's a direct connection of a generator to the grid that we call GG. If it's a connection point between two networks, it could either be an embedded network, in which case it will have a reconciliation type of EN, or it will be a connection between two local networks, in which case it will be NP. So if you pick up some points of connection information and you see MAN 2201 GG, what is it? It's a GG, therefore it's a GIP. And MAN 2201 means it's Manapori 220 kV connection. So there's a lot of coding that actually flows through the market itself. Well, we won't go too far into NSPs. When we do reconciliation, we'll talk about that. What we're concentrating here on is ICPs. And this is where customers or embedded generators connect to a local or an embedded network itself. So we've got a point of connection here, which means there's a demarcation between a network and and a consumer's installation. We have ICPs that are actually distributor only. So when you look through the registry, you may actually see some ICPs that have a reconciliation type of LE or SI assigned to them. They're just placeholders for distributors' systems. As traders or MEPs, you don't worry about them. You can't populate information into them. You can't switch them. The registry actually prevents you doing it, but it actually allows the distributors to create these so that they can keep track of them within their own systems. But for a standard ICP, and this is the one that the registry will allow the maintenance and the switching activities for, you could actually have one of 3 different reconciliation types. So for an ICP for your house, you may have a reconciliation type of GN, which means that you're a point of connection connected to a network which is directly connected to the grid. If you had a reconciliation type of EN, it's actually saying that you're within an embedded network which is connected to another network which is then connected to the grid. So GN means that the network a consumer is connected to is directly connected to the grid. EN means that the network that the consumer is connected to is indirectly connected to the grid. And this is the way that we actually handle the complexities actually in the reconciliation process, because these connect directly into the way that electricity is reconciled. SB means subtraction, and I didn't pick that term. I would have used a different one actually for it. I would have used DI or DF for differencing or something like that. But some networks must be settled by what we call differencing. Now in New Zealand we use global reconciliation, and we're not going to go in there, but some networks just don't work unless we use a subtractive process actually within it, and they're usually embedded networks, and they will have an ICP that will have a reconciliation type of SB. Now if you're a retailer, you need to ask a lot of questions if you're asked to switch an ICP that has got SB, because there are certain obligations that actually go along with it. You're purchasing a residual volume. So GN, EN, absolutely fine, switch normally. SB will switch fine normally, but you should just ask a question to make sure you're switching the right ICP. Those that we worked through. Right. What I wanted to show you was a little file. Now you've all got this file actually on your memory sticks. It is in draft format, but what I did was I trolled through the registry functional specification and I took out all the fields that people actually maintain. So I've got a list of record types actually down here, and I've got a list of the participant that's actually responsible for actually updating that particular field, and then I've put a description in here actually of exactly what that field is. So it's quite a full description. We may actually put these into more documentation as well. And then over here we've said, okay, if this guy here makes an error, what's the consequence of the error? Who's actually affected? And then we go on and say, is the error recoverable? Because market systems are good at recovering errors, but sometimes there are errors you can't recover from. If this guy makes a mistake, it may be that these people here can't recover from that mistake. And then we go through and say, well, who's the participant that deals with it? And is the customer directly impacted? And the answer is yes. Now there's a filter on here, so let's pick on MEPs. So we say, okay, we just want to isolate the MEP fields. And we might actually pick on something like control device certification, for instance. So we come across here, and what it actually says is if the MEP incorrectly flags the control device certification flag, what's the downstream consequence? Well, this flag indicates that oh, that's the wrong note actually there too. It indicates that the control device is actually certified. the consequence of an error is that the trader actually applies profiles incorrectly in the electricity market. Is the error recoverable? Not entirely. And then who's affected? The trader's affected. Is the customer impacted? Yes, because it could impact actually the customer's purchasing price. So when we go through here, there's a whole lot of different ones actually like that. If we maybe grab another one, compensation factor. We weren't allowed to use the word multiplier within the new code because it was an existing term. We had to use the word compensation factor, but it means the same. Compensation factor is the multiplier that converts a meter reading into real kilowatt hours. Make a mistake with that compensation factor and the volume that you calculate for a consumer's installation is actually incorrect. Now an example might be that a customer's installation has got 500 to 5 CTs. The multiplier should then be 100. But the MEP makes a mistake and records it as 300 to 5 and the multiplier is then actually 60. Now no one apart from the MEP has clarity that that mistake has actually been made, but the mistake actually flows through because that compensation factor is used to determine market volumes and invoicing volumes, and it causes significant customer invoicing and market settlement problems. It may not be recoverable because the trader may not be able to get the money actually back out of the customer, and it affects traders and distributors. And so the MEP affects traders and distributors. Now because there's so much information in the registry and flowing through market systems, there's no way that people can pick up that there has actually been an input error. This is one of the reasons why we audit participants a lot. We want to know that their processes and systems are actually accurate, that effectively, as long as they follow their process, they won't make mistakes like, say, putting in the wrong compensation factor because it's so difficult to find retrospectively. So take that away, have a wee look through it. We might refine it further and we might put it on Jade's website along with the functional specifications so you can reference it. Any questions? Everyone's really quiet. Okay, thanks Jeff.